Greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 133 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Verbanis, and as always, I'm joined by the best gosh darn co-host out there. That would be Mr. Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob. Hey, Bob. What's the good word? How's Trix treating you?
Rick, I'm not sure, but this sounds like a repeat.
A little bit, but say, Bob, you excited for today's gig, pal?
Are you speaking to me in a 1930s lingo?
You're close, Bob.
Lingua franca.
You are close. I am saying hello to you in the colloquium of 1920s.
Oh, the 1920s.
Okay. Yes. In fact, right. we are. I chose that. I've actually looked, for 1929 in honor of our guest today. I'm pretty sure that was the year he was born. So we're having a guest on the show, Chris Norton, who is known affectionately in the Facebook group as Capman. And so he is our guest on the show for our Nightcap series.
The first in our Nightcap series, right?
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
I mean, it's the premiere issue, the premiere edition of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Bob, tell me, how's your week going?
Pretty good so far, Rick. No complaints, but it's Wednesday. Right? So, and I know we're recording off schedule this week because I had a pop-up track meet.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you pull a hammy? Are you okay?
No, I'm okay. I made it up to the top level of the bleachers without much of an incident.
You were winded though. Admit it.
I was a little winded getting up there, but yeah, those are really terrible events.
Mm-hmm.
So I can say that because I know my son's not listening to this, nor will he ever. So I'm pretty safe in that regard. But yeah, it was, they're like 4-hour events.
Yeah. I saw the picture of you and Casey and sitting in the bleachers. You had the look of,
yeah, but I wish I'd brought food and water.
Well, you get good points, dad points and mom points for doing the show. I did the same thing over the weekend. I think you saw my picture.
I did. You were out doing road guard. Man on the wall.
I was. So my daughter, who's a junior in high school, she is been in color guard for years, and now she's in winter guard, during the winter, which is an internal sport without the marching band and all that. So this is a much more a dramatic arts type of thing, but it's also sport, right? Because they're twirling flags. I said twirl. Oh my God, she would kill me. Spin.
Oh yeah, they don't twirl. That's a different thing.
Yeah. They spin flags and rifles and sabers, and man, it's amazing. The choreography of this is they're just fantastic. But anyway, so I was out there during our home show. They needed, we're doing logistics, and I always do logistics. So I was out there for about 8 hours directing traffic, making a lot of friends.
Oh yeah, that's one way to make friends.
Yeah, tell them they can't park there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
I love that name, Winter Guard, too, because it does sound like it would be like a Soviet era.
I know, right?
Or something. So it's very, very like ear catching, right?
It is.
Winter Guard. Yeah.
I do have a question for you, Bob, because I was very concerned, and I know some of our listeners, at least one, was probably concerned about something that you had said on the show a few weeks ago when you said that you were going to go visit a couple of old Marine buddies, right? Yeah. And then you were like, one of them said, "Hey, you remember blank?" I don't know the guy's name, Charlie or whatever.
Right.
Hey, do you remember him? And you're like drawing a blank. You're like, I have no idea who this guy is. And you were really concerned that you were losing your memory. Tell the listeners that's not the case.
Okay. Well, I will, just as I told you last episode, Rick.
You didn't tell me during the episode. You told me off air.
Oh, did I? I thought maybe you lost your memory. I don't know.
I hope to God it was off air. Or else I'm just okay. Well, everybody skip forward 2 minutes now.
It went fine. I did not know him, nor did he know me. He had known my two friends from a different period of their career, which was shortly after I had left. So that was nice. And you know how nervous I was about that that weekend, right? Because I hadn't seen these guys for, 15, 20 years. And, we've all changed quite a bit in those years. And I was deathly afraid that either, something political was going to come up or, whatever. And it was just going to torpedo the whole weekend. But it turned out great. It was great. We avoided all those conversations. And
well, that's good.
Really, really a great weekend.
And I think we have a listener who's probably relieved. I think the rest are like, what is he talking about?
They were all on pins and needles. I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we have, speaking of pins and needles, we've got a really cool announcement on who our next guest is going to be at next episode. It's going to tie in, Bob. It's going to tie in with the March Madness bracket, and stick around to the end of the episode and we'll announce who that guest is going to be.
All right.
So I'm really, really excited about that.
I'm going to stick around.
Yeah. Birthdays coming up, Bob. There's a few birthdays, some Captain America creators, coming up here in a couple of days on April 28th. Dick Ayers. All
right. I like Dick. Should have said that. What the heck was that?
Did
you want to? I know you're going to clip that one.
Oh, hell no.
It's okay. It's okay. It's
Did you want to finish your sentence, Bob? I think it was a little abbreviated.
Yeah, Dick Ayers, also well known on the Sergeant Fury. So
yeah,
God bless him.
Yeah, celebrating a birthday April 28th, and then Tim Sale celebrating a birthday May 1st. Well, when I say celebrate, would have been his birthday.
We're celebrating for him.
Yeah, we're definitely going to celebrate. Yeah. And Tim Sale, fantastic artist on Captain America White. And then, he did all those series with Jeff Loeb. And I actually just won a piece from Captain America White issue number 5. I just won it on auction. I haven't gotten it in hand yet, but when I do, I will definitely share it in the Facebook group. But it's a really cool piece. I actually had a piece from this series, and that is specific issue. I had the very last page, and it was really cool. It was Captain America riding away in modern time on his motorcycle, holding up his shield with a flag in the background, and it was like a very dramatic page. And I really did like it. I didn't love it, but I really did like it. And I ended up trading that for another piece, and I did kind of regret it that I let that piece go. Yeah. So when these pages came up, there was like 5 different pages of the first 6 pages actually of issue 5 of Captain America White, and I got page 4, which is really cool. Just to set the scene, there's Red Skull has Bucky on top of a Zeppelin flying over Paris. And he's got, bombs on it, and he's going to go blow up Paris, and he's going to kill Bucky. But Captain America is there, and he commandeers a Nazi motorcycle, and he's like, "I'll get you, Skull!" Right? And he goes and he drives up the angle of the Eiffel Tower. You know how it kind of comes out, right?
Right.
And he goes up that, jumps off the motorcycle to get on top of the Zeppelin. And so I have the page where he's driving up the Eiffel Tower, and it's got some cool close-ups of the Red Skull and Bucky and Paris and everything. So I'm excited to get that.
But I think it's pronounced Awful Tower.
Awful Tower?
Yeah, just so you know.
Okay. Yeah. I'll be sure to remember that. and to our 2 listeners in France, I apologize.
What was some cartoon my kids watched, one of those movies, right, where they called it the Awful Tower.
They
mispronounced it.
Oh,
I thought maybe you knew what that was, because I certainly don't remember what show it was.
No. But I do apologize. Actually, and I may have told this joke before, but I love this joke. The words "I'm sorry" and "I apologize" mean the same thing, unless you're at a funeral.
True that. Yes, you have told that before, and it's equally funny this time.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Anyway, so those are the birthdays coming up. So let's talk about what we're doing today with the Nightcap series.
Yeah.
I'm going to give a little credit out there to a different podcast. This podcast is called Josie's Bar. And if you're a Daredevil fan, you might recognize that name. Josie's Bar is a place in Hell's Kitchen that Matt, Foggy, Karen might go to. And so these two ladies formed this podcast, and they named it after Josie's Bar. And it basically, they do what we do. They cover the Daredevil comics panel by panel, except they do it a little differently. They started with episode 1 was issue 1, episode 2, issue 2.
Wow.
And so they're going through all the issues, and I think they're up to episode 76 now.
Wow.
But they start their show by talking about what drinks that they are choosing for that particular podcast, because it's Josie's Bar, right? So it kind of fits into that. So I kind of stole that idea when we were talking about the nightcap, and I thought it'd be a lot of fun to do that now. And we're tying it in to a, I guess what do you call it? A perk, right?
Sure. Yeah.
For our patrons of our show. And so one of the perks of the patrons of our show is if you are at the super soldier level, which is the highest you can do, you get to be a guest on the show once a year, and you get to pick the topic. So what better way than to combine the two than to have our guest on the show today. And a couple other perks that you're at, and we'll talk about that today, is one of them is the challenge coin, the What Would Cap Do challenge coin. So we'll talk about that in a minute too. If you are interested in becoming a patron or learning more about that, just go to our website. It's CaptainAmericaComicBookFans.com, and you can learn more about being a patron on the show. And we certainly do appreciate it. The other thing we do appreciate are 5-star reviews. And Bob, ask me if we have a new 5-star review.
Rick, do we have one?
No.
Oh,
I know. Didn't we? Like, what's going on?
I meant to leave one. I keep forgetting.
It's falling off a cliff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute too. But we've left our guest in the green room, I think, long enough. So I think it's time to bring on our guest for the Nightcap series, and that is one Mr. Chris Norton, a.k.a. Capman.
Uma pausa no seu podcast para falar sobre a beleza, essa força poderosa que nos move. No Grupo L'Oréal, nós criamos a beleza com sustentabilidade. Utilizamos em nossas embalagens 85% de plástico PET de origem reciclada. 65% dos ingredientes vieram de base biológica ou derivados de minerais abundantes. Grupo L'Oréal, nós criamos a beleza que move o mundo.
Interrompemos esse podcast para perguntar: quem você quer ser?
Designer, engenheira, pedagoga,
administrador.
Quer saber? O Senac EAD é nota máxima no MEC. Tem cursos de diversas áreas, com conteúdo elaborado por especialistas do mercado e professores mestres e doutores. Ainda tem o Senac Carreiras, conectando estudantes a vagas de emprego em todo o país. Saiba mais em ead.senac.br/graduação.
Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
All right.
Yeah, we appreciate you being on the show. We appreciate you being a patron of the show. It's you have been also very, very vocal and frequent in the Facebook group. Giving a lot of Caps wisdoms as you tend to post, which
Love
are always
that feature.
Yeah, always fun to see. So
Yeah.
We appreciate that. And you've been, how long have you been on the Facebook group?
It's been a little bit over a year now. I think it was maybe January of last year, somewhere around that I got on the Facebook group.
Oh, great. What do you do for a living?
I'm a teacher.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done a lot of different things. I got out of education for a while, but currently I'm back in. I got pulled back into education. So yeah.
Like
Okay.
Mob, right?
Yep.
Just when you think you're out, they pull you back in.
Exactly, just
Yeah.
like Pacino.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what you did. I just knew you had a copious amount of free time based on how many posts you do in the Facebook group.
Well, it was interesting. I got involved with the Facebook group. I've been listening to the podcast for some time prior to that, and had thought about, didn't do a lot of stuff on Facebook and was kind of hemming and hawing about whether I wanted to get involved or not. And I kind of went through a rough patch in my life. And as I often have done throughout my life, when I go through a rough patch, I kind of turn to CAP. And so that's kind of what got me to go ahead and take the plunge. And it was really meaningful and helpful to me during that rough patch. And now that things are going rather smoothly again, I'm still having a great time. And it's a great group, great bunch of people.
Well, fantastic. Well,
I love hearing that.
Yeah. Cap's there for all of us.
Yeah.
On one level or another. He means something to each one of us in a different way. All right. So indulge me here. I'm going to do a little bit of a little introduction on Nightcap. And I might actually, Bob, I edit these podcasts, but I don't do special effects or anything like that, but I might add some music. You just do that when you're listening. But
I do the explosions and
those special effects. Oh, yeah.
That's my job.
No,
that's
you just do.
Part. Come on.
Yeah. No, Bob, you just do effects.
Way to downgrade me. Okay.
All right. So we're going to talk about Nightcap. And, one of the things that the expression Nightcap's been around for a long time. And when I looked it up, it could mean a couple different things. Now, a nightcap is something that, let's go to the night before Christmas, right? Ma and her kerchief and I and my cap, right? Nightcaps were a thing back in the day, and people wore them to bed because it was cold, and that was the reason behind it. And so that's where the expression came from. Then nightcap became something else where it was, well, here's a little cocktail before bed to help me sleep. And so then that kind of expression came into its own. And then I think people have taken it to a whole nother level. So yeah. We're going to start the Nightcap series by asking what each one of us is, what is your drink of choice tonight for the show? And so we're gonna let Chris go first since he's our guest.
All right. Well, thanks. I actually don't drink as much as I used to. My system has decided to tell me that all the things that I used to love to do, all my favorite foods and things, right. When you get to a certain age, your system says, "Oh, we're done with that. You've had enough of that. You've lived on it." And but I thought for tonight I would make a special exception, and I'm actually just splitting a beer with my wife. But it's Great Lakes Elliott Ness Amber Lager.
Oh,
yes.
So,
all right, that
Elliott Ness, very nice.
Yeah,
and I the 30s,
Yeah, and I should rephrase. I know I made a joke that the reason I did 1929 was because our guest was born that age. Obviously, you look great for 1929. Yeah, but no, the topic of that Chris chose today was to do with Steve Rogers and the Great Depression and how he was, influenced by living in the Great Depression, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So that's why I mentioned that. So I apologize before I forgot to say that. But Bob,
Rick,
what's your poison, Bob?
All right. Well, in honor of Steve Rogers' Irish heritage, I've gone with a Jameson's Irish whiskey.
Ooh,
on the rocks for tonight. Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, it's a couple fingers, maybe 4. 5 at most.
All right, it's a hand.
It's a hand. Oh, let's face it.
Yeah. Oh, you got a fistful of Jameson's Irish.
There you go. Yeah.
All right, very nice.
And yourself, Rick? What's your poison tonight?
Well, Bob, I'm going to probably answer this question every single time we do this bit, and that is because I have a regular, and what I do is I have I'm a vodka guy, and I do half cranberry, half seltzer, with lime.
Oh,
So
nice. And is
technically it's a
that
Cape Cod.
Is that a paper parasol? I see.
It is, and I like to keep my pinky up when I drink it. No, but actually, it is in my Captain America tumbler that
It's
my
in your
daughter bought
tumbler.
me.
All right.
Yes,
That's
I like it because it has a very large straw, and I can
Yeah.
drink it quicker.
Yeah. You know what I miss from living up in they don't have them down here, Rick. I don't, maybe I'm sure they must have them in Western, you said Western New York, right? Yeah. Lime Rickies.
What are those?
So it's sort of like a seltzer water with some lime juice and like a little bit of like a raspberry flavoring. And I used to get them at all like the the ice cream stands up in. I grew up in the Northeast, up in Massachusetts, but Vermont, New Hampshire. If you went to like one of the mom and pop ice cream parlors, you get a raspberry lime Ricky or just a lime Ricky, which would just be the lime juice and the seltzer water. But somehow it was always so good in the summer, but they don't sell them down here. So. Anyway,
You lost me, Bob.
Okay.
I've never heard of it.
Well, now that you mentioned it, I'm thinking raspberry lime Ricky and a couple fingers of vodka, and that might be pretty good. So, yeah.
An interesting thing related to the Great Depression is that, during Prohibition in the 20s, everybody drank gin because that was pretty readily available. Nobody drank any vodka drinks, Rick, because at that point, the U.S. hadn't recognized the Soviet Union, so there wasn't any trade going on. It wasn't until I think about 1933 when FDR recognized the Soviet Union that vodka then became available in the United States again.
So what I hear you saying is, when I take my time machine, I shouldn't go back more than 90 years.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
When you use that when you'll have that Dr. Doom platform come down, make sure.
Yeah. If there's no vodka, I don't want to go. All right. Let's do a toast.
All right.
To Cap.
To Cap.
All right. Another question I would like to ask you, Chris, is what was your first Cap comic? Do you recall?
I do. It was Marvel Double Feature number 12, which was reprinting Tales of Suspense number 88. And it was a Gil Kane cover. It was a Gil Kane drawn issue. And it had Cap being molested by Power Man and Sword Man on the cover. And that was the very first one I remember buying off the rack, way back in the day. And then, I kept buying those reprints. The first non-reprint issue I bought was almost a year later, I think. And that was one of the part of the Kirby 70s run with the Night People. I don't remember the exact issue, 202 or something like that. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you from the get-go, were you always Catman, or were there other books, titles you were interested in?
No, when I first started reading comics, I was really into the Flash and Spider-Man. And I don't know what it was. I think, I liked the Gil Kane art, and then I liked the Kirby art. Then in those Marvel double features, of course, they had the stories where Cap met Black Panther, and I was interested in Black Panther. I found the Falcon interesting, the way Kirby did him. So I think it was more, I was into Marvel. I thought Black Panther and Falcon were interesting. I liked the art. I liked the Kirby art. And so Cap just kind of slowly grew on me, and then by the time of the National Force story, I was a regular reader. And then my first subscription to any comic was the Stern Byrne run. I remember the first comic I ever got in the mail was at 247, the very first one that Byrne did with Stern, with the Baron Strucker and Nick Fury on the cover. And I still remember vividly just getting that out of the mail and how excited I was.
I got to tell you, all this is absolutely fascinating, but I'm still stuck on the fact when you said Cap was molested on the cover. I thought these were. I thought there was
many things.
Okay, all right. I thought there was just the Comic Code Authority was going on back then, but all right. Those are pretty cool. So you became a Jack Kirby fan pretty early.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I went through the process that a lot of guys go through with Kirby, where initially I liked him, not so much that I really actually knew his name. He was kind of ubiquitous with those older issues. The first artist by name that I really got into is John Byrne.
Hmm.
But I really kind of ended up not liking Kirby as I got older and as in my teens. I was like, oh, it's all cartoony and I can't stand that cartooniness. And it
Mhm.
wasn't until later, when I was older again, that I came back to Kirby and said, wow, the guy's a genius. I love him.
I think I went that same path, except I didn't start liking him. I
Mhm.
went right into he's cartoony, and I didn't care for him. And that was because back then being in comics wasn't cool. And so you would get made fun of. I know my dad, he didn't understand. He was like, what are you doing with those funny books? And it wasn't a serious story. It wasn't serious medium. And so I always looked at Kirby and I was like, he's just drawing like from a coloring book, and it had made me, I was embarrassed to be a comic fan because it was like so cartoony, to your point. And then it wasn't until I became an adult and learned a little bit more about art and the genius behind him and everything that not just his creativity, but his work on the page. I kind of was almost embarrassed of myself. That was like, oh, I can't believe I actually thought that.
Yeah. So much of Kirby is almost unquantifiable stuff. It's the composition. It's just the sheer power and energy that comes out of his work. I think I think he truly is. If comics has produced a genius artist, he was the one.
Right.
Tribute right there.
Your favorite creative team then was John Byrne for Cap?
I think probably team wise, it was probably the Stern Byrne, or maybe Lee Kirby. I even like Lee Colin a lot,
Mhm.
But my favorite writer, as you know, Rick, it's the same as yours, is J.M. DeMatteis.
Yeah. He made it to the Final Four.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, he made it to the Final Four.
Yeah.
Well, okay. We're going to throw the J.M. DeMatteis interview out. What was your favorite podcast episode so far?
Oh, well, if I can't pick DeMatteis, I guess I'd probably pick the Englehart interview. I like Englehart's work a lot, and I really enjoyed his interview. But in general, I always like it when you guys do the special episodes, the top 10 villains, the top 10 retcons, things like that. Those are always a lot of fun. I enjoy those a lot.
All right.
You have any suggestions for a top 10?
I think at one point I had mentioned on the Facebook about, like top 10 speeches. He's made so many though. How do you begin to whittle that down? I don't know,
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard because folks are like, wow, I know he did this speech about this. And then they got to spend the next 4 hours, trying to find the issue that it was in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It is a little tough. Yeah. It's not as easy.
But it's a great idea.
Cover
though.
though.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be fun.
So.
Yeah.
Although we could just say, do search Catman posts.
That's right.
And then they can find most of them, and then they could pick from those. Maybe.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah.
So Chris, take us through what you wanted to cover today, because it was an interesting topic when you brought it to us. It was, you have a lot of knowledge about the Great Depression, and Steve Rogers grew up in the Great Depression, and you wanted to talk about how the Great Depression influenced him, and then you wanted to tie it in with the What Would Cap Do challenge coin. So take us through that.
Yeah. So when I was out of teaching for quite a number of years, and one of the jobs I had for about 8 years, I ran a gallery that was dedicated to WPA art, which was government funded art from the Great Depression. We had a collection of over 200 of those. And, it's good, solid art, but it's not Jack Kirby, So part of what made it interesting was the era that the art came from and what that was all about. So there was a lot of historical things that we did in relationship to the gallery that we had. And as far as I know, it's still the only gallery that is dedicated to WPA art in the world. Because they always are showing WPA art. But so I became very interested in the Great Depression through that job. And, I thought, what could I bring to a podcast? And I thought, I have all this knowledge of the Great Depression. Steve grew up in the Great Depression, and superheroes began during the Great Depression, right? Superman was created in the late 1930s, Batman late 1930s, Submariner, Human Torch. So I always kind of wondered, what was it about growing up in New York City during the Great Depression that might have influenced Steve Rogers to be the way he is, to have the values he has, the way that he acts, especially what allowed him to wake up many years, depending on the sliding scale, however many years, and not be like completely, driven insane by things, but being able to adjust to things, even if you just look at him in the 60s, when he came back in the 60s, he very easily accepted Sam Wilson as a friend and a partner, so what if he is this guy, what was it about the 30s that might have influenced him? So when I was talking with you, Rick, about what the show might entail, we talked about the challenge coin, and that the challenge coin has those virtues of CAP, and maybe we could kind of go through those and look at how growing up in the Great Depression might have influenced those things. And when I was looking at them, thinking about tonight, I really thought, gosh, you can put them together into two groups of four. There's do for others, empathy, compassion, humility, and sacrifice. They all kind of fit to me under that kind of umbrella. And then the other one is do it right. And I kind of picked that phrase because it fits along with do for others. There are other ways you could say it, of course, but honesty, integrity, courage, and perseverance all kind of fit under that umbrella. So, I was thinking we could kind of look at those two things, look at kind of some seminal stories, his origin, Mad Bomb, Cap for Prez and things like that. And look at, his behavior in those stories and how maybe growing up in the Depression might have influenced Cap's reaction to some of these things.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic, and can't wait to dive into it.
I'm excited about this.
All right. Well,
I'm on
where
the
do you
edge of
want
my seat.
Bob loves anything. He just has to show up for. What? All right. So
Let's put it this way: when my wife gave birth to my son, I showed up, and then I went down and I had some chili. So,
are we talking about when she gave birth? Or are we talking about the conception?
No, but I think I had a Sunday after that. But whatever, it's immaterial. Yeah.
All right. Okay. No. Speaking of your wife, your lovely wife, your amazing.
Oh,
wife,
I knew you were going to go here.
Right? She's a lovely lady. I've only chatted with her briefly. I don't have a whole lot of personal.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of personal interaction with her, but we're friends on Facebook, and and just the stuff that she writes and everything. I think she's a very amazing person.
Amazing.
So yes. So she wanted to join the Facebook group, right?
Yes, she did.
And so I guess she wanted to comment on something,
yeah.
Right? Because we're in a public group, anybody can see it. Right.
Rules have changed. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's a public group.
Yeah.
And so she wanted to comment on something you posted. And so I accepted, it was like, oh, sure. Casey can be, I know she'll be a great member. Yeah. I Casey.
Upstanding citizen. Yes. Yeah.
And then I see, I every once in a while, because I can't be on the group all the time.
No.
And so we have moderators, right? And you and
Heath
and
Daniel.
Daniel do an amazing job. I know their names. Thank you.
Okay.
And they do amazing job helping out on the group. And I go in every once in a while just to check the activity log, what's everybody doing? And I see in there this very interesting things that Bob, that you did in the group.
Yeah.
And it says here.
Yeah.
I'm pulling it up.
Yeah. Pull it. You don't even remember. You can't remember it. There's like 4 words.
No, Bob. There was 3 acts here. And Robert Lucius declined Casey Lucius's request to participate. Robert Lucius banned Casey Lucius from the group. Robert Lucius revoked Casey Lucius's ability to participate.
There you go.
And I was like, oh no.
And then Rick wrote me and I said, you don't need to be in my safe space.
I get it. I get it. I totally get it. But I just, I'm sorry. I had to mention it.
I'm perfectly fine. My safe space.
Okay. No, I get it. Yeah.
Is that going to affect how safe things are at home for you, or?
What's
Blink twice, Bob.
It's a very close. Very close. Yes. Indeed. Yes. Oh, she's like, oh, that's nice. When did you get that? I only needed that once.
Yeah.
All right. I'm sorry, Chris. You're a longtime listener of the show. You probably know I do these things called tangents. That was a tangent. I apologize for interrupting. Please continue.
Chris, actually, before we get started, I mean, not everybody is an old geezer on this show, like most of us. We do have we have like a handful of folks that are under the age of 50. So it might be worth revisiting the Great Depression and what it was, how it got started and how it affected people.
Yeah. It's one of those things where we are all of a similar geezer era, the three of us, I think. There were people that were around in the 30s when we were kids, but now there's very few, and anybody who's left was a kid themselves, basically you hear about the Roaring 20s. After World War I ended, there was this booming economy, and they called it the Roaring 20s, but there were a number of factors, but a lot of that money was flowing into the hands of the people at the top, and it wasn't really flowing into the hands of everybody who was working down at the bottom. So eventually what happened is by 1929, the economy really slowed down. If you are one of the mega rich and you get extra money, you're already spending your money on whatever you need anyways. You're not going to buy extra food. You're not going to buy extra clothes, et cetera, et cetera. With the people, the working class folks, not being able to share in all that wealth, they just weren't buying. And so things started to slow down. Well, when things start to slow down, it was only logical if you're, running an industry or something that you're going to start making less. And if you're making less because you're selling less, you're going to lay off people. And so it became this cycle at that time where, people were out of work, and that caused more people to end up being out of work. We always talk about the Great Crash, but that was more of a symptom rather than a cause of the Great Depression. But they certainly did kind of coincide. So anyways, it became this sort of intractable situation, and nobody could see any way out of it. Herbert Hoover was the president at the time, who was a
smart guy.
He was a very smart guy. Yeah. He was an engineer. He was known as a great humanitarian. He had helped keep people from starving in World War I.
Did you vote for him, Chris?
Well, I was only one in 1929, so no, I didn't get the chance. I think my father probably did, but then you got the rise of things called Hoovervilles, which were encampments, shanty towns outside of all the big cities, because people started moving around. The country was on the move in the 30s. Everybody was looking for work.
Yeah.
If you were a young man, 16 years old, 17, your dad might say, look, I can't feed everybody. You're going to have to go out and see if you can find yourself a job. So you get the hobos riding the rails. You get the people from the Dust Bowl, which was also this big economic and environmental disaster out in the Midwest, heading mostly west to California to look for work. So there were people all over the place looking for work during the 1930s. And it's at this point when people really began to feel like, this isn't just me. This is a bigger problem, and we're all in it together, and we need to help each other out. And there also became this great interest amongst everybody about, well, what's it like for other people? Are they suffering like me? What are their problems? What are their issues? So it was a time of people really beginning to think about the conditions of other people, the conditions around the country, and also about, look, we we need to, we're all in this together, and we all need to help each other. You know, FDR, who succeeded Herbert Hoover and it was a very active president at the time, said that he felt that Americans needed not a handout, but a hand up.
Mhm.
And that kind of describes that kind of the ethos of that period, you know. And then
Right.
you look at New York City, where we know, you know, Steve Rogers grew up, and in the comics, it was the Lower East End, which is the same section of town that Jack Kirby grew up in, you know. And there was, you know, there's a lot of poverty there. There was an area where a lot of immigrants had settled. So Steve would have been in touch with, you know, people from whose families had come from all over the world. You know, soup kitchens. There were, I don't know how many, you know, thousands of soup kitchens and, you know, bread lines and things like that, where you'd have these charitable organizations that would give out soup and bread and something to drink for people who are out of work. So, you know, you would lining up was a big thing in the 30s. People waited in lines to hopefully get a job. They waited in lines to get, you know, soup or something like that. So, you know, Steve would have saw all this, and there were a lot of people that were trying to figure out, how do we get out of this? You know, what kind of changes need to be made? And so there was a lot of political ferment going on, you know, fascists and socialists and communists, you know, from the two different ends of the political spectrum. And then there was a lot of union organizing, which is kind of a fascinating thing about the 30s, where even though it was really hard to get a job, people said, we're going to get together in groups and we're going to demand that we get treated better. So the 30s was the big era of union getting organized. And there was the era also when the government began to be seen as something that existed to help out people during hard times. Because before the Roosevelt administration, you know, you would only deal with the federal government, maybe with the post office, and that was about it. So I don't know, that I could go on forever.
No, I mean, that's
that's
fascinating, right? And of course, I mean, and you're kind of heading into this, right? In the United States, FDR took it in one direction, but in other places around the world who were facing very similar sorts of challenges in Western Europe and in Asia, of course, Japan and Germany took it in an entirely different direction to solve those problems.
Yep, absolutely. And that was a big part of the 30s was that fascism that was going on. You know, FDR and Hitler both came to power in the same year, months apart. You know, Mussolini was already entrenched in Italy since the 20s. You know, Japan invaded China in the 30s. Italy invaded Ethiopia. There's the Spanish Civil War. So fascism was a big part of what was going on, and a possibility that people were trying to avoid. There was even an attempt at a fascist coup here in America.
Right. Yeah.
Bob, you've probably heard of Smedley Butler. You know,
absolutely.
who blew the whistle on that coup, if you've ever heard about that. You know, and there was a lot going on in the 30s. I'll just say that. So
I know Rick's familiar with Old Gimlet Eye, but you know, we'll save that for another day.
I was just thinking, Chris, are you in a soup kitchen right now? What's going on over there?
You hear my wife doing the dishes out in the kitchen right now.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's if you're talking about what you're hearing, that's what you're hearing.
Okay,
Yeah.
I wasn't quite sure.
I had to
Okay.
do those before I started tonight.
I did too.
Ah.
I was allowed
I
to
gotta
do the
pass because I'm
podcast.
doing something really important tonight. So.
Yeah, oh, you are. Well, then you owe us one there. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So we're getting into, I guess now the cap value number one, right? You mentioned this before on the coin, some of the characteristics, and you labeled them do for others. And so we do have 8 characteristics on the coin. So you're choosing empathy, compassion, humility, sacrifice, and these are all. And by the way, when we did this coin, the idea behind it was, because on one side we have Captain America's shield, on the other side we have it says, what would Cap do? And the idea was we put the characteristics on the outer rim of the coin so that just, you know, if you're in a situation and you're not sure what to do, just think, what would Cap do? Right. And would he have humility in this situation? Would he have empathy towards his fellow man, compassion? Would he make a sacrifice for someone? So, you know, let's talk about those characteristics and how they went into the comics.
Yeah, so if you start right at the very beginning, you know, the origin, and kind of take it as, kind of look at it holistically, not just Captain America Comics #1, but what we all kind of understand is the origin, and it's been added to and embellished over the years, you know. It's like, you know, what made this guy an anti-fascist? Because that, you know, that's what he was. It's a year before Pearl Harbor, and you know, he's signing up because of what's going on, you know, with Germany over in Europe. And it's easy to see with Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, who were both, you know, young Jewish men, why they were anti-fascists. But, you know, apart from the Jewish population in the US in the 1930s, you know, we were not the united front against fascism that was created after Pearl Harbor happened, you know. And, you know, there was the, you know, there was a big group of people who were opposed to getting involved to the war over there, partly because of what happened during World War I. World War I was this terrible, you know, terrible trench warfare, you know, modern weaponry, gas, you know, mustard gas and things like that. So after World War I, people were like, this is a terrible, terrible thing. Let's never do this anymore. That's why they called it the war to end all wars, you know. But fascism was very militaristic, you know, and so it ended up that if you didn't find a way to keep it from growing a big army and overrunning its neighbors, you know, you would have to go to war with it. And it took a while for people in America to come to that realization. So, you know, I wonder about who were the people in the 30s that would have volunteered to try to stop fascism a year before Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. And I think part of it with Steve is he grew up in the Lower East Side, as I mentioned. So he would have been around a lot of Jewish people. Arnie Roth, his friend, was Jewish, right? So I'm sure he learned a lot of things from them and their family. You know, a lot of these were first generation or second generation Jews. They had family back in Germany, you know, so they knew what was going on in a way that you know, other people didn't. So I think that was part of it. And then, you know, also if you look at the people who were opposed to fascism early on, it's interesting. They were called, after the war began, what did they call them? Premature anti-fascists. Steve Rogers was kind of a premature anti-fascist, but you know, the main group that you think of historically that were people who went and fought in the Spanish Civil War. And the Spanish Civil War is a fascinating thing. And you know, if you hate history, I guess this podcast really isn't going to be for you. But if you like history, hopefully, you know, it'll be something people are interested in. But the Spanish Civil War there was an elected coalition government, because Spain, unlike the U.S., was a lot like most European countries are today, where you know, there's not just two political parties, there are several, and they make coalitions. And it was a left-wing coalition, you know. It was socialists and communists and liberals and things. And they were elected in Spain to be the government. And there was this fascist civil war that was created by Franco, who tried to overthrow that government. And there were people from all over the world that went to Spain to fight, you know, against this fascist group that Franco had. And the U.S. stayed neutral, but Germany sent and Italy sent armaments to Franco, and eventually they won. They won the Spanish Civil War. Franco was in power in Spain until the 70s when he died. But so, you know, it was a time where people were really interested in backing up what they said and what they believed, right? So if you believed in you know, not just a left-wing government, but an elected government that the people wanted in Spain, there were people, you know, thousands of guys from America that joined what was called the Abraham Lincoln Battalion and went to Spain and fought and died in Spain. And Steve, you know, he would have been aware of it. The Spanish Civil War was a big kind of debating topic in the U.S. at the time, you know, but these were people who had integrity and they walked the walk, and they, you know, they followed their beliefs and backed them up.
Let me ask you this, Chris, because we've had this discussion on here before. And in fact, we've asked listeners, and none of the 5 of them have responded yet. But we've asked, you know, because Steve Rogers is Irish Catholic, right? And of course, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby are of Jewish origins. And so Steve, blonde hair, blue eyed, right? So do you think there was a method to the madness of creating Cap as a blonde haired, blue eyed,
Right.
kid instead of a brown haired, brown eyed, kid?
Right. Yeah, maybe, Simon and Siegel and oh my God, the guys that created Captain America.
Joe Simon and Jack Kirby.
No, the guys that created Superman. Siegel and
Schuster.
Schuster. Thank you, Rick. I was having a senior moment. But they created a Wasp, but like you said, Bob, he was, he had dark hair and dark eyes. So I mean, I could see either of those guys, Joe or Jack, and I'm not an expert on either of them, but I could see them doing that, and you look at some of the stuff Kirby did when he was over at DC. He had a character called the Funky Flash Man, who was he was a takeoff on Stan the Man Lee, and it was a critical, because Stan was kind of a used car salesman, and that was not Jack, and so Jack really was picking on Stan with this character that he put in DC. So I could see Jack, thinking that way. Let's make it be the Aryan ideal. I could definitely see that happening,
Right. Well, big social movement of the time, right? Clearly conflict, brought up the Franco inspired Civil War.
Yeah.
So let's maybe move on a little bit to Steve's befriending of Sam Wilson, right? Because that was also another period of great turmoil in American society, where there were people lining up on both sides of the divide, and he chose to take one particular path. So
and also let's just remind everybody that that's a skip in a couple decades, right? So we are jumping a little bit here from the Great Depression to him during the 60s, which in Marvel time wouldn't be right now, but at the time they were writing this during the 60s, which did have that uproar as you mentioned. But I think the focus of talking about that is going to be based on a man from the Great Depression in that time period and how he's reacting. Right.
Yeah. And it's not to say that, all of us are put together from a number of influences, so Steve's his own person, et cetera. But, but this particular approach that I'm taking is what about the 30s might have fed into who he was. But, the 60s was the other great period of social unrest and protest, but the 30s was the first one in the 20th century. And, lynching would have been a common thing in the 30s, not in New York City, of course, but in the South. And people were aware of it. There was a big anti-lynching movement going on throughout the country. There was a big case that became nationally famous and internationally famous called the Scottsboro Boys. These were 9 black kids who were riding the rails looking for work, and they got accused of rape by a couple of white girls. And that galvanized the nation, so Steve would have been aware of that. And, Steve being Steve might have felt he needed to have an opinion on that. He needed to come down on what was right and wrong about that sort of thing. But the other thing about the Depression, it was a great leveling period. So the poor whites and the poor blacks weren't quite as antagonistic towards each other necessarily in the 30s, because everybody was kind of in this together, and so some of that might have infused it. But for him to so quickly kind of be part of the civil, kind of accept the civil rights movement at that time, and Sam and everything, makes me think of there's a really great documentary called Riding the Rails, and it's about these guys who were teenagers that rode the rails in the 30s. And it talks about, what happened to all those guys when they got older. And, a lot of them got involved in the civil rights movement. They all kind of went to war. But then later on, they were involved in the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement, and so their experiences in the 30s, especially for them riding the rails and getting a sense of the country and what was regular people were struggling through, made them very, sympathetic to the concerns of others. And so I think this was part of the zeitgeist of the time that Steve probably absorbed,
Yeah, I know. Obviously, when that came out, there was some reaction to it, because I think there was a certain, there was that fraction in the country, and I do think some followers of the Captain America character probably fell into an area where they maybe did not like the Black culture or Black people or whatever, and probably were a little offended. I think there were some letters that were sent in and things like that. So it was an interesting choice by Stan Lee at that time. And I think, we're all here. We are sitting so many decades later, looking back and saying, but of course Steve would have done that. That's who Steve is. But at that time, that was new. And that was something that, really he hadn't shown before in so many ways. This was a major step. And so, and we're all better for it.
Yeah. And, certainly there was the Harlem Renaissance going on in the 30s. So, swing music and jazz had infused the culture. He would have been aware of that. He would have been aware of probably where it came from, how it started, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, things like that. He would have been aware of a story about an opera singer, a Black opera singer named Marian Anderson, who was barred from singing at Constitution Hall by the Daughters of the American Revolution. Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a very important figure and a well-known figure in the 30s, she resigned from the DAR because of that, and along with FDR's Secretary of the Interior, arranged for Marian Anderson to sing at the Lincoln Memorial. So Marian Anderson, the first song she sang at the Lincoln Memorial was "My Country 'Tis of Thee." And so, that would have been on the newsreels or the radio that Steve was listening to. And he would have been aware of things like that.
It's funny. I mean, Rick he makes a really valid point, obliquely. But
why, thanks, Bob.
It's just that, of course, when we're talking about Steve Rogers, right, or Captain America, what we're really talking about is a composite character, right, that's been created by 80 years worth of writers who have contributed along the way to reinforcing certain aspects of his character or de-emphasizing other ones. And so when we think about, of course, his friendship with Sam Wilson and how that budded into a partnership, then we go forward and, I don't know if you're familiar with Nick Spencer's Captain America Generations, which was a one shot. I think it was around 2017 it came out. A really interesting story where, very early on in Steve Rogers' career as Captain America, he encounters Sam Wilson, who has come back in time, and encounters him on the battlefield. And Sam becomes a bit of a mentor to young Steve, who is just, sort of tentatively exploring what he is capable of. And it's a wonderful story. And then, of course, you look at, Mark Waid's Man Out of Time miniseries, where, Steve has an opportunity to go back and he encounters that young Black man at the baseball game, right? And he approaches him in a way that is incongruent with what the Black man expects for that period.
Right.
And so along the way, we see that characteristic of Steve sort of reinforced over time by subsequent writers, and gives us what we expect to see now from Steve.
And I think it's important to remember that, we can talk about what the majority accepted culture was in a time period, but that doesn't mean that everybody was that way. So you can say in the 30s, the majority accepted culture was a culture of segregation, especially in the South, but there was some of that in the North. But that doesn't mean that everybody, agreed with that or felt that way. And so, and I don't think Steve did either. Another thing is, I've thought, and it's a good thing Rick can edit. So anything, that I'm rambling on too much about, Rick, you can edit afterwards, but which will give you more work to do. But I also think about the fact that when Stern and Byrne in their origin story, it talks about him, reading fantasy and escaping from the depression in fantasy and things like that. So, you think about it, if you're into science fiction, and he would have been reading amazing stories with stories by Asimov and things like that. you expect the future to be different. You expect it to be more egalitarian. You expect it to be, have moved beyond petty things. So I could see where Steve Rogers, who was into, those kind of stories, John Carter, Warlord of Mars was popular then, and all that sort of stuff. Would have expected the future to be a different place where some of these petty things we had gotten over, and so was really willing to jump right in and accept those things.
All right, I'm editing all of that out.
Do you think that Steve Rogers watched Star Trek on TV in the 1960s?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, right? That progressive society of the future. And
yeah,
it would have been right up his alley, maybe.
100%.
So I noticed, because you did send some notes in advance about what you were going to talk, and I'm really curious about Mad Mom, because you mentioned that particular storyline as an evidence for this mentality, this character trait of Steve Rogers and his do for others. So how do you connect the dots on that one?
Yeah. Well, for me, Mad Mom is such a quintessential Kirby story, because Kirby was, well, I think there's a panel that sums it up, and I'm not sure if it's a Mad Bomb or not, but it's from that run where Cap says to Sharon, somebody's got to fight for the little guy, and I think that's the way Kirby felt. And that's the 30s ethos in a nutshell. It's about, the little guy, and, which translates into, I don't know, what do you want to call it? The 99%, I guess, to use a recent term, but, so, the Mad Bomb is a story about, a bunch of really rich guys who want to take over things, and they want to keep regular folks, in their place, working hard, creating all the wealth so they can take it, and that was very much a thought in the 30s. I was like, well, wait a minute, why is the economy tanked? Why is there no, Henry Ford's doing fine, the Rockefellers are doing fine, but we're all screwed, and for years and years now we haven't been able to get ahead. What's going on there? So there was this this sense that that we need to do something for the little guy, and not and have a society that takes care of regular folks and average folks, and looks after them. And I just feel like there's a lot of that in Mad Bomb, and that ethos comes out of the 30s. There's a lot of talk about workers. He uses the word over and over again in the Mad Bomb story. He doesn't say people or even the little guy that much. He talks about workers, and that's very much a 1930s way of looking at things, and understanding that, people are workers, and they deserve, to be treated well, and for their work to be meaningful to them, so they can have a decent life and a decent retirement and things like that, and that comes out of the 30s. That comes out of, the programs that not just FDR, but the Congress of the time did, that was all called the New Deal, ending the 40-hour work week, ending child labor, or starting the 40-hour work week, minimum wage, all those, kind of economic things come out of the 30s that we take for granted today. So,
yeah, Rick, see, this is why I come here every Tuesday night, right? Because that's a deconstruction of that particular story arc that I had not heard before. And I've often said, every time I come on this show, Rick is, regaling me with a new way of appreciating a story. And tonight I can thank Chris for giving me a sort of a new lens to go and take a look at the Mad Bomb story arc, which maybe we should do on the show. I've mentioned it before. It's a little long.
Yeah, it's 8 issues. Yeah.
Yeah, we'd have to break it up, but it might be something to consider in the future.
Yeah, we can certainly take a look at that. So, Chris, now we're going into the red decade, and you wanted to talk a little bit about the fear of World War III, I think, because there was the Defenders crossover that happened with Captain America and the Defenders.
Yeah, there was it was a DeMatteis. He was writing Defenders at the same time as he was writing Cap, and there was and it's a very specific page where this guy has been employing psychics, and he wants to, this was during the Cold War. This was the Soviet Union was still around, and he wants to employ psychics to get rid of Russia. to get rid of the Soviet Union. He says, if we get rid of the Soviet Union, then we can have peace because there won't be any rival to the United States. And DeMatteis's Cap was very passionate. And every once in a while, he would get angry and he punches the guy. I mean, he just knocks him on his ass. And Zech draws it perfectly. Nobody can draw a righteously indignant Cap like Zech could. And
amen, brother.
Yeah. And so I just thought about, because then Cap goes on to say that, what I fought for and what I believe in is not about dividing people. It's about bringing people together, And the thing about the 30s is, and this is a topic that even today, right? I mean, how much it's 2023, but people still get nervous when you talk about communists and socialists and things like that, But the American Communist Party had the most influence it ever had at that time in the 30s. The Socialist Party, when FDR crushed Herbert Hoover in the election of 32, the socialist candidate got 1 million votes. So there are many names for the Great Depression, but one of them is the Red Decade. And that's partly because it was the decade of what was called the Popular Front. That was when Russia and Stalin, right, because he was the dictator, it was all his decisions. Stalin decided that instead of trying to fight against capitalism completely, as he saw the rise of fascism, which was, the antithesis of communism, that he wanted to make common cause with liberal governments, with the socialists, because the socialists and the communists had never got along. So the Popular Front era was the 30s, where there was kind of a truce amongst a lot of these groups. And so, communists were more involved in things that were going on. They were the ones that were kind of getting things done, because they were very passionate and dedicated and just a little bit fanatical, and not always in a good way, so they were getting a lot done in the 30s. And so that's kind of why it was called the Red Decade. But it also made everybody afraid that there were communists behind everything, and there was this real belief that all communists are foreigners, which was not true at all. So it's like foreign agitators have come in and caused this strike to happen. No, they didn't. They were regular Americans. Some of them were in the Communist Party, some of them weren't. So it had a lot of influence. It was never that huge. There might have been 375,000 people in the Communist Party at the time. But and a lot of people joined it, like people like Pete Seeger and a lot of screenwriters in Hollywood and other people, because they were the ones that seemed to be getting things done. The communists were for racial integration. So I talked about the Scottsboro Boys earlier, right? Who funded their defense early on? Communist Party of the United States of America, and it's a whole separate topic. There were a lot of negative things about the Communist Party of the U.S., but there were positive things, and people were aware of them at the time. So that's why I talk about the Red Decade. But so Cap wouldn't have been, I think, as terrified of the Soviet Union. Cap is obviously a small d Democrat. There's no doubt about that. So he wouldn't agree with the totalitarian aspects of it. But some of the more some of the economic ideas and things, he wouldn't have been as terrified of it. So this idea that there's some terrible boogeyman that need to be wiped out, that, somebody from the 30s that had his experiences is not going to feel that way, and then, of course, his experiences with them as allies in World War II. So there's that. And then I also think that the other thing is that he hits the guy about is, this warlike attitude that we have to wipe people out. And I think he was also influenced by the anti-war beliefs that happened after World War I, because people don't remember that fascism, one of the big things about fascism is militarism. Like, if you're against making war, you have to be against fascism,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's a really great point about the, Cap grew up in the 30s, which was really the interregnum between the 20s Red Scare, right? And then the subsequent Red Scare, which of course he slept through. So he kind of grew up in that golden, era where there was a little bit more cooperation to be had.
Yep.
So, we actually, you mentioned the fact that the prison stories, and of course, one of them was by Al Milgrom and Alan Kupperberg, and that was in issue 260, which we covered in episode 72, and we talked to Al Milgrom in episode 73 of the podcast. And then there was a subsequent.
Bob, you just took my job.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were alternating.
I usually tell people what episodes.
Right. Yeah, because usually I can't remember.
Did you actually look that up?
That's true. Usually you can't.
I did look it up. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like my job is to just lighten your load a bit.
Oh my God.
That's what I'm all about.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Remind me to put a help wanted ad.
Also, I've finished off my Jamesons, so
I you know what I did.
I'm feeling
too.
more cooperative at this point.
I did too. I think I need a pause here.
Oh, all right. Okay.
All right. You two could talk amongst yourselves, and I'll edit it out.
All right.
I'll be back in a minute.
All right, good. So, and then of course, in volume 3, there was, issue 23, which was another prison story that sort of not juxtaposed, but, sort of delved a little bit again into, Cap's experience behind bars and what he was trying to achieve back there. So how do the prison stories, issue 260 and issue 23 of volume 3, how do those speak to Cap's character?
Both of those speak to this sort of I don't know, it's kind of lampooned in like the 1960s Batman TV series where it's like, well, I'm sure that they can be rehabilitated, and that sort of thing. But he even says basically that in that Al Milgrom story, he's like,
right, yeah,
there's a young kid in the prison, right? And I think that, if he's under the right influences, he can be rehabilitated. And then there's also part of that in that wonderful Mark Waid story in number 23. And so, it's this idea that's very much part of the 30s. It's very much part of the social realist movement, which I'll get to in a second, that there was this understanding that your circumstances have a lot to do with, the choices that you can make, and therefore the choices that you do make,
Sure.
And so there was this real concern about, well, how does poverty affect people? How does it make them do the things they do? Would I be able to rise above it, or would I be the same way,
Right.
And so there was this concern about the poor and the destitute, and you see it in the art. Okay. The art of the 30s is very realistic, and it's about, what is it like for the working man and the poor people and things like that. Grant Wood, John Stewart Curry, T.H. Benton, Thomas Hart Benton were the big artists of the time, and they were not doing abstract stuff. They were doing regular folks, farmers, poor people, workers. So there was this, I've said it before, but that the 30s was all about kind of what's going on with regular folks. And there was this understanding that your circumstances can affect what you become. And you see that especially in the Warner Brothers movies of the time. All those gangster movies, James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, Edward G. Robinson, all those movies, Angels with Dirty Faces, Roaring Twenties, Little Caesar, Public Enemy, great classic movies. If you haven't checked them out, check some of those out. But they're all about, well, this guy came from a terrible situation. And so a lot of this had to do with why he became a criminal and a gangster, And so I think that understanding from the 30s causes Cap to react that way when he's in prison, to the idea that, well, you've got to have a better atmosphere where you are, encouraging these people to be their best selves instead of their worst selves,
Right. Yeah. And it seems like, that's his inspiration, his motivation, whatever, for accepting Hawkeye, right? Accepting Black Widow into the Avengers.
Exactly. Diamondback even, right?
Right. Diamondback, right? We can go on and on, right? Jet, in volume 7, of course, and on, examples of Cap willing to give ne'er-do-wells a second chance because their circumstances were likely the cause of what put them on that road in the first place.
Absolutely.
What'd I miss?
Oh, nothing, Rick.
Okay.
No. We just kind of stared at each other. Nobody said anything.
Okay. Did Bob tell you this is his usual halftime? What happens?
Yeah, this is usually when my cat wakes up in the window seat and wants to leave. and starts, and then I let him out, and then like 5 minutes later, he scratches and meows to come back in. So
Right.
But
See,
usually
these are
around
the little things I don't realize when I'm just hearing the edited podcast.
yeah,
Right.
halfway through the show, I'm like, all right, Bob, I'll be right back. And then I just
Right.
get up and he's like, okay.
yeah,
And then I get myself a refresher and I come
popcorn
back with a snack.
or some vegetable sticks
No,
or
today
some
it's-
Terra potato chip. Oh, he's got pistachios, lightly
Oh.
salted. He's watching his sodium today. So good. Glad to. Awesome.
All right, please continue.
Well, we were just talking about the prison stories from Milgram and Wade. So
Yeah. And then Bob had a great insight into how that same characteristic of Cap leads him to, to accept Diamondback and Hawkeye and all these other, ex-criminals.
are you a
Yeah.
second chance guy, Rick?
I am, Bob.
I am too.
I am. I believe
Yeah.
people make mistakes.
Yeah.
As long as you show remorse, as long as you show that, you made a mistake, you recognize the mistake, and that you are sorry for the mistake, then yes, second chance. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I asked that because I hired two people recently. I hired one in December. I just hired one recently in February, and both of them, one of the, I have a very hard time deciding here, but one of the really strong factors that augured in their favor was the fact that for both of them, it was a second chance. Very different circumstances. Neither one of them really to blame, per se, but it was an opportunity for them to get back engaged in the sort of work that we do at the organization that I work for. And so I was just really moved by the fact that they wanted this opportunity. It was something they were striving for. And though, in one case, the guy was a little bit older and he'd been out of it for a while. The other person had been out of it for 10 years, but it was something she wanted to come back to and try again. And so that really moved me. And so I love second chances.
Did you just set me up, Bob?
I try to always set you up.
Did you set me up like, hey, Rick, what do you think of second chances? That way we can just talk about your wonderful pat you on the back there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now I'm waiting.
All right. Bob, that is very cool of you. I can't, you know what?
That means a lot coming from you.
It really does.
I can't tell you what it means.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all about second chances. I mean, my God, you're still on this show after what? How many episodes?
Right. Yeah. So like 347 episodes so far. So.
Oh my God, math.
Right.
Okay.
All right. I think we're moving on, Rick.
All right. Yeah.
Now that you're back from your bathroom call, to Cap Value.
It was a refresher, Bob. It's a nightcap.
Okay.
We should
whatever.
probably call it nightcaps, plural.
Nightcap. It should definitely be nightcaps. So
Yeah,
moving
some of
on
us
to-
didn't have 5 fingers on their first drink, Bob. Some of us only had 2 fingers
Well,
and they have to catch up.
I'm all about efficiency. So Cap Value number 2, doing it right.
Yeah.
It's not doing it right.
I love saying it though. It's my
Should
Sam
I-
Wilson take.
Should I have like a little, porn music in the background? Bound chicka bound bound, doing it right. No,
Doing it
do it
right.
right. Do
All
the
right.
right thing.
Okay.
Do the right thing.
I'm sticking to doing it right.
Yeah. So that was honesty, integrity, courage, and perseverance. So,
Yeah, which is your favorite, Chris, of those 4? Which would you say?
oh man, I think integrity maybe. I mean, they're all great, but I think integrity because integrity is about not only do you see not only do you have beliefs and values, but if you have integrity, then you're going to follow up on those and you're going to try to be consistent with those, even when it's hard. So
I agree. I think you nailed it. I think integrity is the one that is probably the one I would want to be most associated with. However, if you were to ask my kids, my wife, people close to me, they know, they'll be like, oh, honesty. Honesty is Dad's, is Rick's, it's his big thing. I'm a big, proponent of honesty and being honest but see, being honest to me is more than just telling the truth. Being honest means not stealing, not, bearing false witness, not, doing a lot of different things, to be honest. So anyway, but how about you, Bob? Which of these four stands out to you?
I no, I do like integrity. I remember throughout my, my upbringing, of course, but principally through my time at military college. Of course, we labored under an honor code, and integrity was always drilled in as doing the right thing even when nobody's watching. Which is a saying that it's very brief, of course, and it's very pithy, but it's it's pregnant with a lot of meaning. That you do the right thing when nobody is watching, which is often the hardest thing, right? When nobody's watching, it's easy to do the right thing when everybody's eyes are on you, but when it's not, then and so I think that one is particularly important, with Cap. Right? Of course, he perseveres and he has great physical and moral courage, and he's honest, but he always strives to do the right thing even when nobody is watching him.
You know what else is, Bob, too? In doing when no one's looking is giving people second chances. I think doing that when no one's looking and no one else knows about it probably holds a little bit more weight. Maybe a little more quality. But I'm sorry, Bob, what were you saying before? Go ahead.
I wanted to, the reason I brought that up is there was a little bit of a funny story, but of course you hijacked it. So for your own humorous purposes, but I happened to mention this to one of my employees. And it was just sort of a casual, I'm like, I really believe in second chances. And, I talked about the other employee and, and it's no secret, and I said, and the same thing with you, you wanted to come back and so she sat on that for like 3 or 4 days. And then over the weekend, I got a text message or an email rather. And she was like very upset that I had said that, because she felt I was undervaluing what she had to offer to the organization. And I called her up and I patiently explained, I'm like, no, I didn't mean it that way. You actually said that like you had worked for us 10 years ago, briefly as in capacity, part-time capacity. And then you went and did something else, a career for 10 years. And then you came back and you applied for this job because you realized that what you were doing wasn't right for you anymore. And you wanted to try to do this again and get back into this work. And that connected with me, as somebody that I felt like I had a second chance and I like giving second chances. And so that's how I was trying to explain it to her, but she, I don't know, she must've had a rough weekend or something. And
all right, Chris, well, we're talking about Captain America. And so one of the things that we like about Cap is that he has honesty, integrity, courage, and perseverance. Perhaps maybe you could talk a little bit about that in the next section.
Okay. One of the first issues that I chose was 130. 130 has this great speech that I'm sure a lot of, the Facebook fans are familiar with, where Cap is supposed to go on this program and diss some campus protesters. Which of course was a big issue when 130 came out. I mean, it was in the late 60s, or maybe even early 70s. But and he says, but in a pig's eye, I'm not going to do that, because America was founded by people who, protested the way Britain was treating us, so to me that there's an integrity there. There were people from Cap's generation that didn't skip the 20 years that he did, that didn't like the superficialities of the campus protests. These young kids, and they got long hair and all that, and
those we're damn hippies.
Them. Yeah,
Rick
exactly.
Rick does not like people with long hair.
All right, go on.
The non-follically challenged, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, probably at that time, a lot of the greatest generation people were in their 40s and were losing their follicles too. So they were probably jealous. But, to me, that's Cap having integrity there, because, he believes that the United States is, the ideals of the U.S. are about, being able to speak your mind. He certainly would have saw that a lot in the 30s. In the 30s, especially New York City, every street corner had a guy on a soapbox, like literally, right? That's where that phrase comes from. Somebody getting on a soapbox and talking about what they think is wrong. You'd see that in the parks and things like that, and people would either gather around and say, yeah, we agree with you. What should we do? Or they'd be like, that guy's a crackpot, and keep walking, but that was very much a part of the 30s, was people speaking their mind and demanding what they wanted, marches in the streets and protests. So I think very much for somebody who was young in the 30s to see that kind of protesting in the 60s, especially if you skip the interim years and didn't get old with, a lot of the other folks, then he would totally be on their side. So
very interesting. I'm glad you brought that perspective, because I'd really never thought of, I'm not a historian. I didn't study a lot of the socioeconomic happenings that were going on during these different decades. So this is a pretty interesting insight to see, what did Steve witness during his time and what did he not, because it happened before him, or he happened while he was frozen or so forth. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, and Roger Stern talks about the 30s being a decade of a lot of protests and campus protests. In the very first, he writes a little thing about Cap either before he starts or right at the beginning of his run with Byrne, and talks about, Cap came from this era, and it was an era of great, social protest.
Yeah, and he's remained consistent in his support of people's right to protest. All the way up through, of course, the modern era. And that was, obviously it wasn't always the case back in the early golden age comics. He didn't have that sort of sentimentality toward, the right to protest. And that's, well established in the comics. But of course, that's a different era, right? Those were written for different audiences at a different time and different context, and largely divorced from what we see today. So I think I've heard, maybe it was in the Captain America comic book fans Facebook group. I can't remember, but I know you've talked about the Secret Empire Nomad run, and how that evidenced his commitment to honesty and integrity. And really, we've talked about this. I think maybe we haven't talked about it on the show, but I know Rick and I have talked about it offline a number of times, and this idea of moral injury and when Steve feels betrayed by the institutions that he put his faith in. And this is one of those times where at the end of course, the Secret Empire run, when the bad guy, right? The President Nixon stand-in decides to off himself rather than to be honest, to have integrity, and face justice. Yeah. I think Secret Empire is a real worthwhile one to talk about. And because I see it, when you look at it through the lens of somebody who grew up in the 30s and somebody who was an anti-fascist and fought in World War II and all that, that was an era, that was the New Deal era. And so that was an era when not just, the executive branch, but the congressional, the legislative branch as well, was involved in trying to support the people and help the people. The number of programs and the revolutionary almost changes that happened in the United States in the 30s is incredible. So it makes sense that Steve would have felt like, well, of course you can trust government. They're on our side, I was just reading not too long ago, there's a book by E.L. Doctorow. He's an author who wrote Billy Bathgate and Ragtime, and he grew up in the 30s. He wrote a book about growing up in the 30s called World's Fair. And he was Jewish, and he's talking about how he felt like, you couldn't trust a lot of people, but you could trust your family and maybe President Roosevelt. And a lot of people felt that way. Because of the fireside chats that Roosevelt gave over the radio and things like that, and that the government was now everywhere doing all kinds of things. They were giving jobs to young men in the CCC camps. They built, parks and roads and schools and airports and post offices. And they paid artists to decorate all this stuff. It would certainly fit into the story of Steve Rogers if he was an artist, that he would have had a WPA job, right? Yeah,
doing some paintings or something like that. So this was a very active government in trying to help people's lives. Social Security was passed during the Great Depression. Federal deposit insurance. Until then, a bank failed, you were screwed if you lost your money. But now we're insured up to $250,000 because of that legislation. So it was all kinds of things that were being done by the government. So so if you're that guy, right, and then you miss all the in between, and all of a sudden, boom, you're dropped into the Watergate era, or a couple of years before that. That's going to blow your mind,
Right.
that the government is that way, because you certainly wouldn't have seen it that way in the 30s, and whatever negatives were going on in the government in the 30s, you probably wouldn't have been as aware of in the 30s anyways. The 70s information was much more out there about that kind of stuff. So to me, it really fits a story about a guy from that era, that he finds that out and he's like, screw it. I can't believe it that we had a government that was acting for its own best interest and not the common good, because the 30s was all about the common good. And so he gives up. And then I love what Engelhart has him do when he realizes, wait a minute, I'm supposed to fight all the enemies of the American ideals. And it was okay to fight the Red Skull because he was obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But I should be fighting, the Secret Empire. And basically what he's saying, and it's kind of a message to all of us, is we should be fighting a government that doesn't do what's best for the common good, and kept saying, I should be too. If I'm really Captain America, then I should be fighting anything that goes against what's best for the common good. And he puts the uniform back on. I think it's great stuff.
Yeah. And I don't think you mentioned it earlier, but when we talked about this previously, you talked about the fact that Steve, very early on, young, was steeped in the Four Freedoms and FDR's second Bill of Rights and the Atlantic Charter and all these statements about what the common man has a right to, right? Not just freedom of speech, not just freedom of assembly, but freedom to have a good house, have a good living, have medical care, all these sorts of things.
Right. Yep.
Was what everybody deserved.
Yeah. And, that was very much part of the zeitgeist at the time. Like, look at this mug. These are the Four Freedoms by Norman Rockwell. Everybody's familiar with, these paintings. I mean, Norman Rockwell did the paintings of the Four Freedoms, freedom from what? Freedom from fear, freedom of religion, freedom of worship. These were a big part of kind of the attitude of the era. And certainly I think Steve bought into that, and so he felt very betrayed by all that, I think. All right. You want to hit bicentennial battles quick?
Let's do it.
That's another great Kirby one, which it talks about all kinds of things, right? It takes Cap through all of American history, and he's trying to get the cavalry to not treat the Indians the way they do. He's trying to get these guys who are trying to apprehend an escaped slave to let him go, He's bemoaning the invention of the atomic bomb. He goes into the future and there's war on the moon, and he's bemoaning the fact that, mankind's got to change, So, that ties into all these things that we've been talking about. I don't need to reiterate things that we've been talking about with these other stories too, but bicentennial battles really is a great story that brings together a lot of those thoughts. And I think how Kirby himself, right, was influenced by that era as well.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, right? And I don't want to, this will probably cause some controversy, right? But it does seem, right, that what the bicentennial battles, what Steve Cap is experiencing through the eyes of Kirby is really all the problematic, well, not all of them, but a series of very problematic mythologies in American history, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't want to maybe not psychoanalyze Jack Kirby, but clearly in the 1970s he must have been experiencing, looking back on his life and history of the United States, some concerns.
Yeah, and then at the end he ties it all together in a beautiful way with Cap with the kids, right? It's like that. That was me, one of those kids in 1976. I was the age of these children that are with him, and I was being inspired in the same way. And he, and so Kirby was saying, look, in spite of all these things, here's what America stands for, and so we've got to keep moving it along and keep making it better and keep making it this land of opportunity for everybody,
Amen.
So Cap runs for president. issue 250, or does he? Right? He doesn't. Right?
Right.
He decides to beg off and not run for president. But what does that tell us about his character?
You know, I don't. It doesn't readily jump to my mind exactly what I was thinking when I wrote that. I mean, it's a great issue. It's a great story. You know, and he, you know, he does consider it even after the whole Secret Empire thing. He still thinks that somehow there's a way that, you know, that politics and government can do good things for people. You know, but then he comes down on the side that that's not what he represents. Right? He understands that you have to compromise, you know, with politics and things like that. So certainly, you know, FDR was the consummate politician, right? You know, he was not, you know, he made whatever compromises he had for the long-term goals and vision that he had down the road, you know. So, you know, Steve would have been obviously very much influenced by Roosevelt, I think, and an understanding of, you know, this is what a politician has to do. He kind of has to, you know, he has to have these values and these goals, but he's going to have to do what he has to do to get to them, you know, and realizing that in his role as Cap, he can't do that. He can't make those compromises.
It's a fundamentally different job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then the last one, of course, is Mark Grunwald's The Captain story.
Which we covered extensively last year, right, Rick?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Bob, perhaps maybe you can tell everybody, rattle off all the different episodes.
Yeah. I think it was somewhere between, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was somewhere between episode 5 and 132.
Excellent. Yeah. All right, Bob, way to be prepared for that one. Okay. All right, listeners, go ahead and find it yourself is what Bob is saying.
Yeah. No. What I'm encouraging our listeners to do, Rick, which I don't think that you would object to, is to just browse through the catalog of episodes. Because in browsing, you might find something that piques your interest.
Yes, absolutely. No, Chris, we love this story, obviously, right? We covered it in its full glory. We thought Mark Grunwald did an amazing job taking Steve on this particular journey. So take us through how this ties back to Steve being from the 30s, from the Great Depression, and why it translated into this story.
Right. You know, I think with the Captain story, I mean, it's similar to Secret Empire Nomad, right? But you know, the difference is that he's, you know, he talks about it in that great page where he hands in the uniform and he hands in the shield, you know, and he's like, look, you know, I can't be a representative of the government's policies, you know, and that's also similar to what we talked about with Cap for Prez as well, you know. So there's such a consistency that was carried through by these different authors with Cap, but you know, he decides to keep fighting crime, which he does as Nomad as well, right? Because the 30s was also about like, well, you know, we all have to step up and try to do what we can to make a difference and to help each other. You know, if you get evicted, then your neighbors are going to come and move your furniture back in. Or sometimes if you're getting evicted, all your neighbors are going to come by and they're going to make sure that all that stuff that they're going to sell off, that the bank's going to sell off, is only going to sell for a penny. Nobody's going to, they did this in the 30s. Nobody's going to bid over a penny for anything that's here. And then they give it back to the people so they can keep all their furniture, you know? And so, you know, I think once again, I'm not going to go through all the different things from the 30s that we've already talked about, but they all affect how Cap reacts to this thing, you know? And I love, of course, John Walker is a great juxtaposition. I mean, it's Gru's way of telling us this is who Cap is and this is who he's not. And he's not, you know, John Walker. And it's one, you know, he doesn't really, you know, Gru doesn't like turn John Walker into a black-headed villain either, you know, which is great. It's such a wonderful storyline. And, you know, there isn't really, the only thing with the end of that is there isn't the big epiphany speech like there is at the end of the Nomad one, you know? But I think it's all those things, you know, a guy who comes from the decade of protest, a guy who comes from an era that, you know, is is against militarism, a guy who is against fascism. He's not going to just become a tool of the military industrial complex, and so that ties into the captain's story as well.
Yeah. No, 100%. I first of all, Chris, thank you for coming on the show and taking us through this. Obviously, you have a lot of history, no pun intended, with just the whole Great Depression and learning about that. You're obviously a big buff on the details that went into that and the decades to follow as well. So taking that and combining it to a fictional character of Steve Rogers, who is very much someone we all know he's fictional, but we don't really think of him that way. We think of him as someone who is to aspire to. And so why do we aspire to the characteristics that Steve represents? And a lot of it comes from his upbringing, just like any of us. And so for you to kind of demonstrate what his upbringing was and how it translated into his views on all these different subjects was really, really interesting. So thank you for sharing that with us and the listeners.
Well, thanks. It's my hope that people will find it interesting. I obviously do. And so hopefully it's been fun for you guys, and it'll be fun for, the people that listen.
Hey, before we leave you, however, Chris, are there some resources or something that you would encourage listeners? People want to learn more about this era and where, how and where and when Cap might have grown up, that might be illuminating for them.
Yeah, if you have, if you can get through black and white movies, and it, like, for me, black and white movies are no big deal. They were on TV all the time when I was a kid. Probably same for you guys, but so if that doesn't bother you,
I watched the Three Stooges.
Classic 1930s stuff right there. Yeah, that's when they started, Rick. But if you've ever heard of Frank Capra, he directed It's a Wonderful Life, which so many people know.
Yes.
Any Frank Capra movie is full of that Cap kind of ethos. I know I've mentioned to Rick before that there's a lesser known one from 1941 called Meet John Doe, which
Gary
along with
Cooper.
It's a Wonderful Life, Gary Cooper and Barbara Stanwyck, is just Meet John Doe is such a great kind of Cap movie, and it's about things that that are important today. The things that they talk about in that movie, we need to do nowadays in 2023, but anything by Frank Capra is a great movie. I talked about the social realist artists. Even Picasso did a painting called Guernica, which is it's a huge, very famous painting about Guernica, Spain, which was bombed during the Spanish Civil War, but the art of Thomas Hart Benton, Norman Rockwell, I mentioned, there's a great film. If I can mention this film, it's from 1999. It's called Cradle Will Rock. It has Bill Murray, Jack Black, Susan Sarandon. It's set in the 30s. It's done like a 30s movie. What we call sitcoms today were called screwball comedies, and they were invented by Frank Capra in the 30s. Cradle Will Rock is told like that. It's all about true historical things that happened in the 30s. It's entertaining as hell. Highly recommend that. Another 30s movie or a book is The Grapes of Wrath. That's the classic 1930s film and book. The film was directed by John Ford, a great director. And then I would say, if you want one book on the 30s, if you're interested in this sort of thing, if you like nonfiction, it's called The Hungry Years by T.H. Watkins. And it's just a great overview of the whole 1930s. And then if you're interested in a documentary, there's one just called The Great Depression. It's a documentary by Black Side Video. And if you put that into YouTube, that would come up at several parts, and it's very good.
Yeah. And I think you also mentioned there was an online essay, and I read it because I like to be prepared. And it was by Stephen Attewell, and it's an online essay. And the title of it is Steve Rogers Isn't Just Any Hero. And you can of course Google that, and it will pop right up. And it's an interesting essay, and it touches on a lot of the themes that you've mentioned here tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I got to say, I loved Rebecca De Mornay in The Cradle Will Rock. She was amazing. as that sexy person who came and watched the kids, right?
That-
Was
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
was that a different?
It's a different movie. Yeah, because it has the dog. You just got
Yeah.
Oh, that was The Hand That Rocks the Cradle.
The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. Risky Business. She was great in
Oh.
Risky Business too.
she was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Shwing. Okay. No, great stuff. Great stuff. Hey, Chris, thanks for being a good sport and putting up with me during this whole thing. So that
Our inaugural.
yes.
Yeah, very glad to be part of the inaugural.
Yeah.
Really
Cheers.
appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thank you guys for this podcast. I know it means a lot to so many of us, and the Facebook group is wonderful. So, it's thanks so much.
It's our pleasure. It's a labor of love, and we do it because of guys like you who appreciate it and try to live the characteristics of Steve Rogers on a daily basis. So thank you for being on the show, and thank you for being a patron. All right.
Thanks.
So next episode, I teased Bob that we've got a pretty not that Chris isn't a cool guest, but we have something that ties in with the favorite Captain America writer bracket, the March Madness tie-in, and we did Cap Madness, right? And making it all the way to the end was one Mr. Mark Grunwald. We are going to celebrate Mark Grunwald next episode. We're going to dive into his legacy as one of the all-time greatest Captain America writers. And we're going to have his wife, Catherine Schuler Grunwald, on the episode to talk with her. And we're going to have a few other special guests, little surprises. So make sure you come back. We'll talk with Catherine and a few others about how great Grunwald was to the Captain America mythos.
Chris is clapping. So yes, as am I, because I missed the first opportunity to speak to Catherine way back. And what was it, episode 5 or 4 or something like that? Way back.
It was episode 12, but you're
Was
close.
it 12? Yeah,
it was episode 12.
It was the first year, and that
Came
early
out
spring
in
of
February of 20. What year did we start this?
2021, right?
20. Was it 21? Okay, so
Yeah,
2 years
yeah.
ago.
Yeah, 2 years
Right?
ago.
Okay, over 2
Yeah.
years ago. All right, yeah. You'll have an opportunity to finally talk with her.
Exciting stuff.
She's fun. She is a lot of fun. So yeah, come back next episode for that. We're looking forward to it. It'll be a blast. All right. Well then, to Chris Norton, to Bob Lucius, I'm Rick Verbanis. It has been so much fun wrapping cap with you, gentlemen.
Well, I'll be back next week.
And I'll be listening.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.